Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and this is Strange Mosaic. And like 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, my dear friend Michael Joseph was like, hey, I think you should check out my friend's work. I think you guys would vibe together. And I listened to his interview with him, and there was this sentence you said that was so fascinating because it was basically like a quote from the Bhagavad Gita that I had read in the Bhagavad Gita earlier that day, right? You were talking about surviving on nothing but ghee and having something where you poured ghee on your head. And I had read the quote to pour a little bit of ghee on the blue flame of knowledge just that morning. So I was like, all right, that's coinky dink enough for me. Like, this guy is good. I'll reach out to him at some point. And then things happen and you get busy and life gets in the way. And then you're around for a period of time on the internet, and then you're not, and then you're around and then you're not, and things just get away. But one day, my friend Lindsay said, Christopher Gardner would like to talk to you. And I was like, oh, that's the guy with the key and the blue flame of knowledge. And so we've been chatting. And what's really interesting is since you and I started chatting on, text and email and whatever a few months back, like we'll be there for a little bit, and then there's a space and I'll think, where's Christopher? And then like immediately that day you will text or call or email or something like that. So the psychic connection is there. Christopher Gardner, welcome to Strange Mosaic. I'm excited to talk to you.
I've been, we've gotten to talk offline, but I've been loving your work now for like 6 or 7 years. So this is a real treat for me.
Oh, well, that makes me feel nice. It's interesting. Like I found myself here by accident, right? And I in the beginning felt very, I don't want to say out of place, but I wasn't refined in the way that I presented because this was not something that I ever planned on doing. And I had a lot of nervous tics that I still have some of them, but like that was very recent off of like drug abuse when I started doing shows. So I felt awkward and uncomfortable, and I thought I was just talking, right? And I didn't think of like what I was doing necessarily as my work. But just now in the last like 6 months, I'm starting to have that scenario where people I like and people I respect and whatnot say something about, oh, I've really enjoyed your work and you've done that. And it's just, wow, like I didn't think of it that way, but thank you. And that makes me feel really nice. It took me until like a year ago to realize like I was also like somehow a small business owner. Like, I don't know what I had thought I had been doing, but I just am not doing that. I'm just saying what I think is so. And it feels really nice. And so coming from you, I really appreciate that. Thank you, my friend. And I'm looking forward to talking about whatever comes up today and just letting everybody be a fly on the wall for the conversation.
You had mentioned a few things back in your days with Randy Malgans that really touched me because I had some similar experiences in the rave world. You had described, I don't remember exactly what it is now, but I remember just having like, oh my God, one, you feel like a fire dragon to me. I'm a fire dragon. And I was like, she's so authentic, and the way she's described her experience in some of these raves, that kind of is what drew me into that scene when I was into that scene. So I've always been very interested because you're such an authentic spirit.
Thank you. I'm curious, are you still in touch with or friends with a lot of people that you knew in your early days of rave scene stuff?
None of them, not a single one of them.
So it's interesting to me, the very first people I ever went to parties with, like really not at all. Right. But like the group of people that like were part of my sort of like second phase or second wave, I still am. And it's really interesting to compare what I think was going on with what they think was going on. Right. And it was because when that all started happening, that was like, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was pre-internet as we understand it now. It was pre like smartphone. It was like still like message boards and Napster and downloads taking all day and all of that kind of stuff. And, so it's not like I had all of the stories and information and ideas that are out there now to use to assess the thing I was experiencing then. I was having the experience and thinking those thoughts then. I have a lot of other thoughts in retrospect, but it almost feels like it's beginning to feel, and I don't mean this in any kind of like superior or inferior kind of way or any kind of offensive way, that I can't possibly be the same species as some of these people, right? Who are all, some of them are wonderful people, because I was coming at it from a point of observation and analysis that I don't think was even like widely spoken about or available to most people then. So like either it is like a skill that I picked up outside of anything mainstream, which of course I've talked about and is certainly possible. Or the other thing is like, we've all entered this realm from disparate places, right? And the things that one senses and picks up on and is concerned about or considers worthy of their observation and attention is completely different based on your entrance point or you know, where you're coming from.
That's my worldview. Like you know, specifically when it came to the rave scene, I was still an athlete at the time, so I didn't do drugs. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea that the majority of people were on ecstasy. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know what ecstasy was. So I would go to these clubs with like actual drug dealers, not even knowing that they were drug dealers.
Did you think ecstasy was a Joey Beltram track?
No, I didn't know that. So I was like so naive. And so my whole view of what I was experiencing, my projection onto the whole scene was extremely innocent. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't reality. It was the exact opposite of somebody that was coming through like your portal or somebody else's portal. Like it was a very clean, benign experience for me. I just love to dance.
Yeah. So one of the earliest like American rave super like tracks that was a big hit was that track Energy Flash by Joey Beltram that has that ecstasy in it, right? So a person who just wandered into a rave back in the 90s off the street, that would be their first exposure to ecstasy, like if they didn't understand what was going on inside the bodies of all the people that were there, right? Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. But no, I wouldn't say that I came into the rave scene from exactly that. Like I had done drugs before, but not a lot and not in that kind of environment. But I remember a few years prior to that when I did do drugs for the first time, because I came into that experience for very different portal than the other people who I was doing the drugs with. Like it was so the first drug that I think I had tried smoking pot once before that, but it was just like a total no-go. The first drug I ever tried, I smoked crack. I didn't even know that's what I was doing. Right. Wow. And so I didn't have this idea in my head that this is really bad. And I had no front loading about what that experience was or anything like that. And I wasn't even clear on what I was doing. So I had a very innocent, non-paranoid, sort of multi-realmed, like it was kind of like being a cat or something. Like I suddenly could see and hear things that I couldn't normally see and hear, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't think anything, I had no idea that's what the experience would be. So that first time, right? Like I know everyone always says the first time you do a drug, particularly something like cocaine or heroin or whatever, it's never going to be as good as the first time. But most of the people like have some idea of what they're doing. And so like they're usually in a certain kind of lifestyle. I was like an upper middle class kid who had just left gymnastics not that long before. And like, this was my first walk on the wild side that I didn't even realize was a walk on the wild side because the people that I was doing it with didn't seem that wild from the outside. So I had this very, I think, like holistic experience of exactly just the chemicals and none of the social stigma or any of that stuff around it, which is very different than what the experience became. So it's probably in some ways similar to your walking into the rave scene, not front loaded at all. It's just like, oh, this sounds good. This feels good. I like this. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like it.
Okay. So you said, when Michael Joseph first suggested I check your workout, like I think it was like coming at it from like a nutrition standpoint. Like when he was doing his podcast, he was obviously well known for his video series, and then he had started doing a podcast. I think you were like the first or second guest, and then I was either right before you or right after you or something like that. It was pretty early on in his stuff. And I think he was connecting us more based on like where I was at with the things I was talking about nutrition wise at that time. And so that was my first sort of exposure to you. And then when I listened to your long form interview with him, and maybe I listened to one or two other things, maybe I heard you with like Mike Williams around that same time or someone else. Like, I think I was seeing you like more as a health and then an esoteric guy with no real awareness that you had an athletic or a rave or music kind of as well. And that really I didn't know until I spoke to you in real life. So interesting. This sort of, I'm meeting more and more people who we have like a few main things in common. And when you come into like the conspiracy realm, there's like a certain amount of poo-pooing of like sports and a certain amount of poo-pooing of electronic music, or if you were into that kind of thing, at least that was, I think it's less so now. I think there's been a lot of people coming out of the closet about, their backgrounds with those things or have spoken openly about them. But I didn't really know that because those weren't the hot things to sort of focus on at that time. I mean, Michael was very interested in my dance music stuff or whatnot, but really like no one ever interviewed me or talked to me at all about gymnastics until the Larry Nassar scandal happened.
Yeah.
And suddenly that became like, okay, that's actually interesting. You were a tennis player and a football player and a fairly successful and good one. And so can you like just talk to me and us a little bit sort of about that? Because I don't think that's something people might guess of you if they just heard like the one or two most watched videos you've ever made.
Well, my parents met on, I believe, Chris Everett's father's tennis court in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. They met on a tennis date. So I always grew up with tennis growing up in South Florida. And in my high school, Plantation High School, we won 3 state championships in a row. My senior year was the first state championship. And then after I graduated, they won 2 more. And that's like to win in Florida, a state championship in tennis is in the largest classification, 6A is pretty big deal. We had 4 guys on my high school tennis team that were nationally ranked in all scholarship. There was the top 6 of us were all scholarship athletes. I got a scholarship in football. I was scholar athlete of the year my senior year because I was a starter in tennis, soccer, and football. My soccer career as a little kid brought me into football. And in all honesty, I hated running, but I loved kicking. I loved hitting things really hard. So tennis and kicking footballs was a natural for me. My favorite tennis player when I was growing up was Jim Courier, and he was a baseline just grunter. Like he would just crush his forehand off the baseline. So I was a slow white boy, so I kind of patterned my game after him. But so I love playing tennis, and my best friend and I, like my average Saturday would be, I'd wake up like around 6 a.m. We ride our bikes to the tennis courts, play tennis till about 11, ride our bikes home, get something to eat, then ride our bikes, to like the bowling alley. Like, we just never stopped. We were always just go. And usually in the afternoons in Florida, we could play pickup football games, which was unheard of in other parts of the country. So football, tennis, soccer, that was like really my initiation growing up into competition. And I ended up being a very highly sought after as a football player. And those scholarships were always the best scholarships. So I decided to go up north. I actually went up to your digs, West Virginia, checked out West Virginia for a minute. And I chose to go to Michigan State. And I went to Michigan State for two reasons. They told me, one, I could start right away, and I didn't want to sit the bench. So that was very appealing. And then we also got to play Notre Dame. And I was very vindictive back then. I wanted to play and beat Notre Dame because I wanted to go there, and they kind of shunned me. They told me I was a really good player, but I wasn't like top 5 in the country. And so I was like, I'm going to show them. I'm going to kick against them every year. So Michigan State fit the criteria, and I went up there not really knowing that I had a family history there. My grandfather, who I never met personally. My dad's dad was a boxing champion at Michigan State. So apparently we had some athletic chops at that university. So I played there for 4 years, and we ended up signing with the Baltimore Ravens as an unrestricted free agent after my senior year. Was on their practice squad for half a season, and then was cut. And then I played in the Arena Football League for a few years. In all honesty, I kind of lost my verve for playing at that level when I was at the end of my junior year in college. And it was mainly just because of the business aspect of it. I just saw the meat grinder componentry of it. And as I became older, I kind of started to know myself better. Mm-hmm. I just had so much positive momentum as a young man. I got so much accolades for being what I was athletically. That's where all my identity was. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I started to have some extra sensory perception through meditation and yoga and things like that, I quickly was like, I'm not relative to this world at all. Mm-hmm. And especially I wasn't relative to fans, and I wasn't relative to coaches. I still to this day love kicking things. And my daughter loves kicking things. Like, she shows affection by kicking me, which I find very funny. But yeah, I always loved the skill and the concentration and the, outperforming what I had already did, but the actual business and the whole thing that was wrapped around perception is reality when it came to fans, that really, really disgusted me. And so I've never treated a person like, what have you done for me lately type thing. And that was like the whole sports fan world. So I'd gotten pretty dejected with that. And I didn't fit that world. Like, I didn't fit. I'm a person that does very good with how would you say it? Positive reinforcement. Mm. And at that time, I was being subjected to nothing but men that were into negative reinforcement. And the way I am, the way my self-image is that if you come at me with negative reinforcement more than twice, you're out. Like, I'm not even going to listen to you. And so I suffer from, I heard it once, oppositional defiance disorder. Like, if somebody comes at me very hard in a negative way, trying to prove that they're, whatever they're trying to prove, they're going to have a bad time with me. I don't cuck to that at all. So in the professional football world, in the collegiate football world, that's pretty much the end of your career if you don't cuck to that. So yeah, that's that side of my life in a nutshell.
All right. So I already got a whole bunch of stuff here that we can go off into a bunch of different angles on. So I'm just going to kind of go down. And at first I thought I'm going to let you pick which one we start with, but then the list got so long that I'm just going to go down in order so I don't miss them. So you mentioned this when we chatted about West Virginia University, right? And I was on the gymnastics team there, and you and I are a year apart. So I'm not a fire dragon. I think I'm a wood rabbit. But a lot of people are pretty confused. Like, when they're surprised when they see my astrology, And I had the conversation as well about sort of birth date astrology versus conception date astrology and whatnot. Right. People are like, wow, there's so much water in your astrology. You're so fiery and whatever. So this is a common thing. But that people say about me, I do seem to have a lot of fire, but I'm not a fire dragon. But I have to, there was a very reasonable explanation at the time as to how I ended up at West Virginia University. That seemed to make sense then. And in hindsight, doesn't make very much sense, but there's some other options that make a lot more sense. And I find it odd that you also, passed through West Virginia at that time. So you would have been, if you were age according to grades and things like that, the next year after me there, because I entered there fall of 93, I think, and competed in the 1994 season there. Yeah, because it was the year of the earthquake in Los Angeles. So in 1994. So the story that is the make sense story from back in the day was that I had a coach in my club gymnastics who just for like a period of time, like I had been sort of out of gymnastics because I had a neck injury during the time she started working at the gym that I had trained at and also worked at as, coaching little kids and stuff. And she and I kind of became friendly. And then I decided to go back to gymnastics after, the neck injury. And then she took a job as a student assistant coach at West Virginia University because she wanted to go back to school and get a master's degree or whatever, right? So she went there. And then during my senior year of high school, I sort of what was supposed to be my senior year of high school, but it was really more not attending much school. But I went and visited her. Right. Oh, I got something. I'm already falling out of chronological order here because my relationship with time is becoming increasingly strange. I hurt my neck while she was there. And then when she left after I went back, but I didn't even know West Virginia had a gymnastics team. Like I'm from Los Angeles. Like I've heard of West Virginia because Mary Lou Retton was from there, but I didn't know anything about West Virginia University gymnastics, but she was coaching there. And I went there to visit her and decided, I think I'd like to do college gymnastics and whatever. And I went back and started training. And I walked onto the team there because I had a couple of years off and whatnot. But it was really weird the way she came into my life and the way that some weird things that I've known about her. I think she is probably a project person as well. And just there seemed to be a lot of strange comings together of people from different realms that don't make any sense in the area of Los Angeles that I lived in. So I ended up going there and, it's always just seemed like an aside to me, like, okay, I got diverted into this weird thing for a year and then that was it. But as I've done deeper and deeper research and my research has gotten weirder and weirder, two places that Boeing has a stronghold is Morgantown, West Virginia and Chatsworth, California. And, so then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, I see. Like that was an option that came up that then got encouraged because that allowed me to stay sort of in that orbit, right? And I don't know if you remember the PRT from Morgantown. Do you remember the PRT? That was a monorail system that went all around the town that they were so proud of. Yes. Okay, so that is that was a Boeing project. So that won them like an award at the World's Fair or something like that. And that's a Boeing project. And when I started digging into like what was behind that and what might be underneath that and some other things like that, then suddenly it started to become clear to me how and why I actually ended up in West Virginia and why things went down for me the way they did there, because they very quickly spun out of control. It became a disaster on a level that like pre-internet disasters didn't usually come about for freshmen in quite the same way or a spectacular fashion as mine did. Right. And so I was just curious, when you went to Morgantown, I mean, obviously, like when I went there, I was just bedazzled by some of the gymnastics-y stuff. They're always trying to just show you the coolest things about it and whatnot. But as I lived there, Morgantown was a very strange place. And as I have researched things that have gone on in West Virginia related to like Andy Colvin's stuff about the Mothman and different things. I mean, he and I got into it about Boeing too, and he's well aware of that. I didn't catch it back in 1992, the first time I visited there. But
Right.
now certainly lived up to whatever those sort of legends are supposed to be. What were your thoughts about it when you were there? And I'm just curious, like it's almost, okay, I don't know if you have any relationship with Boeing in your life, but there seems to be always this connection to what I would term, and I have a completely different description of what it actually is than most people, the secret space program and athletics and some of these locations. Have any of these things ever come up for you before? And what were your thoughts on West Virginia when you were there?
Maybe indirectly. I mean, my grandfather worked for the U.S. Air Force, and he did some very weird eugenics studies for pilots that could handle high G stress. So my football career was always, while he was alive, was, he was always asking me about who were the best athletes, and he would ask me to observe them. Well, he wouldn't ask me to observe them. He would ask me what I observed from them, like what characteristics made the best athletes. And he would share with me that's actually what makes the best fighter pilots. And so I kind of grew up with that. I don't know if there was any direct relation to Boeing.
Well, I guess would be, I think that Boeing's above ground, like what they claim to be doing, and they're doing, because when you're doing something as a cover, you still have to do it, right? Is really cover for their work trying to understand the pre-existing particle accelerators that are part of the Earth, and the places where they have a lot of their installations and their compounds and stuff are basically what my friends at APM Research would call like bases or sarcophagi built around these structures that they claim are theirs, but really they're studying something that was there before. And my guess would be that the G of the highest speed airplanes, right, the person's body that can withstand that is probably nothing compared to the G one would have to be able to withstand if you were in the energy field of a particle accelerator. So, but they'd be looking for the same person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I have had my entire life, especially since running into a few alchemists friends in my early 20s, a real fascination with particle accelerators, most notably what's called the Nazi bell.
Yep.
And the reason why that was really prominent in my consciousness was because I had friends that had actually done experiments with red mercury. So, who was the doctor that I read that talked about? There was a series of books where they really dove deeply into what the Nazi bell actually was.
Right. It's Joseph Farrell has done a lot of stuff on that. There's other people as well, but yeah.
Yeah, it was Dr. Joseph Farrell's books. I read 2 of them on it. And it went in alignment with what my alchemist friends were telling me about what that actually was. And then there was a movie, God, I don't even know when it came out, called Hellboy. It was like a really bad movie, but it actually talked about the portal that the Nazis ripped open. They showed it in a ceremony setting, in a round circular setting that had very specific masonry. They didn't say it was the Nazi bell. I was like, that might be a truth drop when that occurred. But that all makes sense to me, understanding what mercury was to the Antiquitech world, like to the old world.
Yep.
Relative to being able to bring energy in from a different dimension, because energy isn't created or destroyed. But when we get what's known as over unity energy in this dimensional scape, it's usually being siphoned from another dimension. It's usually being pulled from somewhere else. And
correct.
So
I want to show you something. Okay. So this is the Nazi bell, right? That's not the bell, but like, this is where they experimented with it. This is the thing that like held it above the ground kind of thing. Right. And just so this is the PRT in Morgantown. I don't know if you remember this, but I'm looking for, I'm having trouble finding it right now, but there's one, here you go. this looks almost, this goes in a circle. It goes in, I wasn't sharing. Never mind. I thought I was sharing. Laura's like, you're not sharing, Emily. Let me go back and show you again. So let me pull this up. So here's the Nazi bell, right? What's happening? Why is this doing that? Okay. So here's the Nazi bell, right? Where they experimented with it. And then this is the WVU PRT. And it goes around the town in a circle. Nazi bell, PRT. Okay. And so this is a tram, like a people mover kind of thing that goes to 3 or 4 different spots around the university and town. It looks a lot like the people mover at Disneyland. Have you ever been? Okay. And from everything that I can suss up here, there's a particle accelerator under the ground there. And this is just like going around the same track, but above the ground. Mm-hmm. I think they're really into that. Like, I'm very suspicious of the placement and locations of like race car tracks and, even velodromes for bicycle things, kind of stuff like that. Right. So I think that local athletic clubs, whether they be gyms or tennis academies or local football pickup games, they're looking for not just, it isn't necessarily about the best athletes, but it's about the athlete that has certain unique qualities, like a certain energy or acceleration about them, or something specific that they're able to sort of, their body can withstand a lot of energy and pressure, right? Yeah. And they also, like, I think that a lot of this what you were talking about when you were talking about taking energy from other realms and bringing them into this one, I think sometimes they use the athlete, the human being, as like the temporary courier or the storage device to sort of transport that or traffic that across those lines. And so it has to be a container that can handle that level of energy.
Yeah, I mean, high level athletes access flow state more and more and more than the normal person. And in flow state, you're in that egoless, really high potentiated state. Mm-hmm. And so you're actually like I've been in many flow states in athletic competition where it was almost like watching my body do it. I was almost like a third person, just witnessing, being the witnessing awareness. And it would make sense, especially like in football stadiums, just the shape of the stadiums. And I've listened to a lot of like Quinn Michaels' work a few years ago, where he had a very similar. Have you ever heard of Quinn Michaels?
I know, yeah. I mean, I listened to some of his early stuff, and then he went a little bit off. But yeah,
He was in some of his early work, he was actually tracing the amount of electricity used under all these
and stuff.
Yeah. So yeah. I like that theory. It makes sense. And the thing with the harnessing energy of crowds, mm-hmm. It's very obvious that human attention is by far the most valuable commodity in this universe that we live in. Like, it's literally human attention is the commodity of all commodities. And so however they harness it or condense it or concentrate it, it would make sense that they would have these oval-like or circular-like structures to be able to actually receive the juice that comes from the competition and comes from the people's emotional swings.
Yeah, I think there's many things going on. I think that they're used for different things in different states and stages and phases. And so I think there are current human created particle accelerators, and then there's particle accelerators that have been here long before we have. And I think they're in different phases of activation. And sometimes they're generating energy, and sometimes they're collecting energy, and sometimes there's this sort of exchange going back and forth. Right. And so, when somebody is going in circles and circles and circles and circles, are they adding their energy to the particle accelerator? Is the particle accelerator creating an energy field that if you can harmonize with it, then you're going to be in flow state? What is the sort of information exchange back and forth? There's all kinds of interesting, once you start to see particle accelerators being to the earth, like what our spinal cord and the things associated with that are to our bodies. And there suddenly like there's a whole other realm of possibilities that opens up, right? Yeah. So I want to say, so the other place that you mentioned and that you ended up, oh, one more thing on West Virginia. Do you know who Todd Sauerbrunn is?
Yeah. He was their punter kicker.
Energetically remind me a lot of him because he was on the football team at West Virginia. Well, he was on the soccer team and the football team, right? He came in as a soccer player and then they pulled him to be the kicker for the football team. And he was starting his good run that eventually ended up with him becoming, drafted by the NFL and all that kind of stuff the year that I was there. And there is a similarity in energy signature between the two of you. And so when you said soccer and football and whatnot, you know what I mean? That is kind of interesting.
He and I were built exactly the same.
Yep.
We were like really thick through our trunk and our thighs. Mm-hmm. And so like, a lot of my scouting reports that were given was like they would compare me to him. I never punted live in games. He did it all. Mm-hmm. He punted, did kickoffs, field goals.
Massive. Yeah. Those rugby player legs,
Yeah. When I was in college, my thigh, I had 27-inch thighs.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, he did all those thick leg sports like lacrosse and rugby and soccer. He was like on 4 or 5 teams at school,
Yeah, I really enjoyed. I think he had a 99-yard punt. It rolled 20 yards, but I think he has the NCAA record for the longest punt ever.
Yeah. So you ended up at Michigan State, which is interesting as well, because Michigan State is the center of the whole scandal regarding regarding gymnastics and pedophilia and the Larry Nassar thing. And it relates not just to Michigan State's gymnastics team, though that's certainly part of it, but the entirety of the whole scandal, whichever part of it people know about. But it's also the school where there's a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with the Phoenix program. I think there's a Doug Valentine book about that, but that was like one of the major early operations of some of the MK Ultra projects back in the 70s. And then they're implicated in this. And as you look into Michigan State, it's one of the most heavily alumni funded like colleges that there is, particularly related to the athletic program. And you were talking about having come from a sort of a legacy family there, and that's a big thing there. What's odd is about this whole thing. My sister's dissertation is actually from the Michigan State Press. Right. It's weird. Like the family somehow had to get connected to West Virginia University and to Michigan State and whatever. But Michigan State is a really unusual place. And I connected it. It's very, very connected, oddly, in some weird way, to UCLA, which is where both my parents went. I was doing something with one of the people in the Project Kids group, and the layout of the city of Lansing and where their university, some of the private gymnastics clubs, and then the cultural centers related to Eli Broad. I don't know if you know who Eli.
Yeah, that's the college I graduated from, the Eli Broad Business College.
So it's the exact same layout as those things in Los Angeles. So you have UCLA ending up with the most number of people who had been on the national team and had their encounter with Larry Nassar, ending up on the UCLA gymnastics team. And one of the earliest whistleblowers on that, from a gym in Los Angeles that is equidistant that the gym was from the gym in Lansing, and then Eli Broad Museum and Theater, and one of their other installations being the exact same arrangement in Los Angeles as they are in Lansing.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, and the Broad Theater being implicated in the pizza stuff, right, and whatnot.
Oh, really?
Deeper, some of the really, when you get into the really weird layers of it that start to lead to certain universities and certain styles of art and whatnot, that comes up. Right. So it's bizarre. It's like, this is even like there's a geometry to this stuff in our physical universe that's important as well. Almost like a template, so that the folks understand the lay of the land regardless of where they are.
It makes sense. I mean, when I was there, it was a weird, I was a duck out of water, right? Because I was a Florida boy going to Michigan. I never lived in an area where there was a real winter. So it was my first time in college. Like you don't know what other colleges are like, or at least I didn't. And every year, I think there was like 6 or 7 suicides on the train tracks. Like there were train tracks that ran right through the college. So a bunch of people would choose to exit stage left with, jumping in front of a train. The song, what was that Stone Temple Pilots song? God, it was like one of their most popular songs. That was based on a girl that had drowned in the Red Cedar River on Michigan State's campus. So
come up with the Interstate Love Song.
No, I don't think it was Interstate Love Song.
So that's from 1994. Vaseline, Dead and Bloated. I was just trying to see if I can find something from that period of time. I don't know. I'm not super familiar with, I mean, I know who they are, obviously, but I'm not super familiar with their music. So I wouldn't know, oh, yes, it's obviously this one, but okay.
Yeah, their lead singer was from Detroit, I believe. I don't know if the other band members were, but I don't know what their connection to Michigan State was, but that was a big deal when I was a freshman there. They talked a lot. Everybody talked about that with the Red Cedar River.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it was a very beautiful campus. I mean, it was one of the largest land grant universities in the United States. And, but, you don't know what you don't know. And when I was there, football consumed the majority of my time. So I wasn't really in like social circles or anything like that. Like my whole life revolved around athletics.
So I'm looking at Michigan State, and it does look a lot like West Virginia University. Like there's buildings that look like that kind of West Virginia University as well, which is also a really beautiful campus in some ways. It's very old, and it's not like flat and like all in the same place like UCLA or whatever is. It's like in different areas around town, and some of it looks old and some of it looks new. But there is some similarities. But yeah, it looks beautiful there. And it looks like there's also an element of really high tech going on there as well.
That's probably more recent. that wasn't there. Like a lot of the high tech stuff wasn't really there when I was there.
That's when you were there, yes.
It is a very beautiful campus. It's just massive. Like you can have everything there.
Yeah, I think that and UCLA are two of the biggest campuses in the United States, and there seems to be a lot of connection between them as well. I had that culture shock as well. Like I grew up in California, had never lived anywhere else until I went to Morgantown, and that was part of the shock and the problem for me as well. Like I just wasn't used to having to be functional in that kind of reality. Like I was used to warm weather and not challenging driving and all of that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, for sure. Okay, so you talked about the Arena League football. Like someone that I did gymnastics with at West Virginia, her boyfriend had been on the football team I don't remember, I think he was on the football team for a short period of time at West Virginia University, but then he went to the Arena League as well. And he played in it for a number of years, but had some of the same things to say that you have to say sort of about it. So that's kind of, like interesting in terms of you went there and then you sort of lost your love for the whole thing.
I lost my love in college. No, by the time I got to the Arena League, I was already, halfway out the door in my consciousness. I just did it because I had positive momentum.
Yeah.
I had enough, I guess you would say, good karma kicking wise that, I was in demand.
Yeah.
I wasn't in demand from an NFL perspective, but I kicked in the Arena League for 2 years. And that's actually where I consider I got really good, because the goalposts are half the size of what they are in the NFL. So, and pretty much you kick probably like, I don't know, 3 times as much because the field is so small. So that's where I got good. That's where I really feel like I refined my skill set. But my overall, like playing in the Arena League was Bush League, because there was like next to no fans. I was used to, like, Division I football is a lot like the NFL.
Yeah.
Like once you're at that level and you get a taste of being around that level of refinement, when you go to like some of these other like USFL or Arena League, like at least in my consciousness, I was like too good for it. So I didn't really appreciate it. And I was also, that's when I had started my whole yoga and massage practice. So every day I felt like going to an arena and kicking and stuff like that was like antithetical to my soul. Like I just didn't, it wasn't my bag anymore.
Did your extrasensory experiences, as you sort of referred to them, like when you started doing yoga and meditation, did that start in college for you? How did that overlap? Like, where did that sort of assimilate as part of your reality? Was it when you were still like doing the mainstream sports, or was there like a break from the sports and that's when it came in and then you tried to combine that with the sporting life afterwards and it didn't work? Like, tell me about that process.
Well, I was always super sensitive as a child, but then I got a really bad concussion when I was 16. I got hit in the back of the head. I got jumped. And the concussion kind of knocked the sensitivity out of me for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. It took me about 1.5 years to gain my speech correctly. At the time, nobody ever talked about concussions or how to recover from concussions correctly. Mm-hmm. So my entire junior year, athletically in high school, I was affected. Like I was like an all-state performer as a sophomore, and then I wasn't even all district as a junior. And it all stemmed from the concussion, but nobody talked about it. Coaches didn't talk, like nobody knew. I only knew this in retrospect. By my senior year, all my athletic capabilities came back, and I had a great senior year. But my sensitivity to the world didn't really start to really like come back until my junior year in college. And I went to an NFL, it was like an incubation tank for NFL kickers. And I went to this camp, and my roommate, who was an instructor, was like, "Hey, have you ever done meditation?" And I was like, "No." I mean, what do you mean by, I didn't even know what meditation really meant. And he took me through, I believe, the what is it? The Paramahansa Yogananda meditation. What is that? The TM, Transcendental Meditation. And like, I mean, I don't even know. I don't even think it was 10 minutes. I was like, boom, in a portal, like totally out of body, like. And when I came back, I was like, what the F just happened? Like, what is that? And I was lit up like a Christmas tree. And he was laughing, and he was like, that's you accessing your astral body. And immediately I was hooked. And I had been a born again Christian, in the church that I was part of. The pastor asked me to leave because I was asking a lot of questions about the Bible that couldn't be reconciled. And so he didn't want me to be there. So there was this confluence of events where I was sort of being rejected by the Western world. And then I was, given this Eastern thought way of perceiving things. And so I dove like head first into reading. I probably read about 30 or probably closer to 40 books from Osho. Mm-hmm. And then I read, everything from Chit Nhan Hanh, like all the people that, were given by the CIA to the West to breed a liking to the East. And I really fell in love with, God, I can see the book. The book was called I Am That. And it was like the core philosophy of Vedanta Advaita. And so I had this weird connection to Sanskrit. Like I could listen to Sanskrit much easier than I could listen to Spanish and understand it, even though I'd been exposed to Spanish my entire life. I just had this really weird connection with that way of thinking, and the whole, understanding identity, and understanding that which actually sponsors identity. And I've really dove headfirst into that whole way of thinking. And that was all like right as I started my yoga practice, and my yoga practice completely broke open all the samskaras and all the things that my body was holding from football.
Mm-hmm.
So I had all this pain in my body from essentially just having what's it called when people like do one repetitive motion and their body gets all messed up?
What's that called? My girlfriend's a physical therapist, so I'm hoping. So, yes, I mean, none of us can think of the name of it, but yes, just that sort of injury of like your body accommodating that particular movement, and yeah.
So I was this 195-pound, stiff block of tendon and muscle that only, kicked the ball 150 times a day for 12 years. And so my first yoga instructors really had a ball with me, because I was literally the exact opposite of like these ballerinas that were teaching yoga. But I was very dedicated and very persistent, and I loved it, and I had incredible body awareness. So I had this really good confluence of, okay, here's Eastern thought, here's yoga, and I'm free of everything that was causing me pain and problems in my younger life. And that happened by age 24. Like I was like, literally, I had zero substance, there was nothing that I was addicted to. I had full use of my body and my brain. One of my earliest mentors gave me this book, How to Live on $10,000 a Year. And it was ironic because he was a multi-millionaire. And so I had all these experiences with very wealthy people that were telling me that wealth isn't the route. And I could see it. Like they were like, most of them were miserable. And so I wasn't really under any illusions in a very short while of like gaining this level of mastery in my being. And then it was really interesting. I did this kachiri, which is like part of an Ayurvedic cleanse. And at the end of the 3-week period, I noticed that nobody could be around me. And I was reading more and more about the siddhis yoga route and stuff like that. And they talked very much about frequency as location, and like your relativity, like your baseline frequency of your being, once you become coherent, really determines where you can be and who you can be around. And all of this was matching my direct experience. And I also had a siddhis yoga teacher, and he didn't even know he was a siddhis yoga. He didn't even know that. Like he was just an incredible athlete that got into yoga. And then all of a sudden he had siddhis. He had at least 3 siddhis, which are like superhuman powers that he had for a brief period of time. But I witnessed this stuff. So I was witnessing very supernatural, incredible things, but it was all going through an Eastern lens. It was going through the Enlightenment monistic lens. And then after seeing the bright side of that world, I got to see the dark side of that world.
Yeah.
And traveling to India, and just seeing how everything become, well, I shouldn't say everything. My exposure to the pure state of wanting to know and learn was turned into a business.
Yeah.
And once again, I was butting up against my internal struggle with the business world, the profiteering.
Okay, so let me hop in and ask you some questions. I just want to clarify something. The person who taught you to meditate was a football instructor or a yoga instructor while you were still doing football?
No, they were a football instructor.
Football instructor. So that's interesting. My earliest exposures to those kinds of techniques as well, which in my case wasn't really meditation. It was more like concentration tapes and visualization exercise and things like that. That came from gymnastics. And then later I read the Gateway Experience documents, and I realized, a gymnastics coach was leading me through the Monroe Institute Gateway Experience things, though, and just pretending this was just for sports performance, but like really like we're doing like, traveling outside of time and things like that. And so it's just interesting that when that happens, when those worlds collide. So that was interesting. I want to get into what you circled back to, that sort of commercialization of something that seems like it's more sacred in another way, right? Like with the football, you really started to have problems when it became about like deals and attention and all of that kind of thing. Are you familiar with the new term NIL, name, image, and likeness?
I've heard something about that. That's like what they're doing with paying college players now.
Right. So like that, football for a long time in America, in college or professionally, has been very commercialized, very monetized, very used to influence culture and, commerce and all of that kind of stuff. But gymnastics is having its birth into that as well. Gymnastics there's always been like one person that can make money in gymnastics. Like if you're Mary Lou Retton or if you're Simone Biles, like that's pretty much it. Nobody else ever does. Your parents put hundreds of thousands of dollars into your training. If you're lucky, you get a college scholarship, and that's pretty much it, right? But something happened a couple of years back in that it's been talked about for a while, but there was a gymnast named Caitlin Ohashi from UCLA whose floor routine went like viral on a level that was just beyond anything that had ever happened. And it seems to ignite this conversation about why are these gymnasts not allowed to make money? And that's really what led the charge into this happening for the whole NC2A, right? So now, while they can't make money from the university other than their scholarship money, they're not being directly paid. They can do things with their name and their image that earn money that they can keep, right? So like they can monetize YouTube channels, they can have ads for Reebok, they can do certain things. They just cannot be paid to perform, like, they're not being paid to compete kind of thing, right? And gymnastics seems charge. There are gymnasts now with huge social media presence that are in no way the top gymnasts and would never have been famous or well-known in the previous paradigm, but are making tons of money on TikTok, YouTube, or some of them who may be really hot or have a great body from swimsuit companies or whatever. So suddenly gymnastics has been catapulted into that thing that you were talking about from football, at that space when you're coming out of college and going into sort of a professional thing, and it just is sucking the life out of it. Like, sure, there's people like, I'm sure it's helpful, right? That people are able to make some money and, support their family, or who spend a lot of money on their training and whatnot. But I'm watching like literally any of just like straight plain love of sport for most people be completely like sucked out of the experience, and everybody being concerned about the same shit that like, half the truth move. How many hits do I get on YouTube? How many likes did I get on my post or whatever? So it sounds like you were feeling that like before it was this other thing that it is now, and you weren't really wanting to do that. Like, I was never in that space where
I'm actually, once again, I'm a little bit of a weirdo in this regard. I always was for paying players. Like, we made so much money for our university, like especially.
I do think they should be paid. Yeah.
Especially like if you're in a sport that generates as much revenue as football did, like at Michigan State, even back in the 90s, it was something like we were generating like $60 million a year in straight revenue for the university. And a lot of us had a hard time feeding ourselves. Like
Yep.
literally, like I didn't have enough money. I shouldn't say that. That sounds like a victim mentality. I could have made a lot better dietary choices if I would have had a stipend. Let's just say that. And so I ended up becoming a blackjack. I would play $2 blackjack at the local casino so I could have enough money to eat. I would take my $20 per diem per week and convert it to $60. And then that was enough for me to eat. So I love the fact that players are starting to be able to be valued, because the truth of the matter is what irked me was the corporation, Michigan State University,
Right.
hired its employees, which were coaches. They did not give two shits about anyone.
Yep.
And when I started watching my friends get injured, and I started watching like friends of mine get like a second knee replacement and like all this stuff, and then all the stuff that they abused my body with, like, I'm sorry, we were not taken care of correctly. And I as a kicker, the beautiful thing about me as a kicker, it's like my whole life, I get to sit on the fence and watch things a little bit more astutely than the people that are actually in the grind. So I would be like, walking from the weight room to the training room, and then I would hear the head coach just absolutely obliterating the training staff for sitting a guy and not playing him. Like, so I got to hear things and see things that a lot of other people weren't privy to. And like, I got in a lot of trouble because I would be honest. I would like tell friends of mine, I'd be like, no, our position coach doesn't know, don't do that. Do not do that. And then I would hear meetings where they would actually talk about, okay, we cannot do one more thing for this guy, because if he does that, then the university's on the hook for the rest of their life. Like, I heard those conversations, and this was, for people to think the college football isn't professional football, they're stupid.
It's just professional football where the players don't get paid. That's it. It's the
exactly.
Same.
It's the farm league for the NFL. I mean, it's literally hundreds of billions of dollars throughout the entire country is poured through this. So we were just seen as a commodity. And that's what I didn't like. That's where that was adding insult to injury. Was all I was what I did in my last performance. Right. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And on a spiritual level, I was like, that's horrific. That's not anything. People that want to see me and identify with me on that level, I want nothing to do with.
Yeah, I agree with you. I am much more for athletes being paid by the university who they are working for and performing for than this image likeness thing. I actually think name, image, likeness, that should be the thing that comes along later when you become professional, because that's getting into like almost like the separation of the straw man from the whole living man or whatever kind of thing, right? When somebody is just basically selling a corporate version of themselves as opposed to actually their work and their sweat and all of that kind of stuff, right? I agree with you completely. I agree with that. Any money the university makes off of anything you're doing needs to be passed on some level. I mean, I get it. The university has programs, they have to make money and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is the people that are making that happen are the athletes, and they should be paid proportionately. I'm much more for that than this other weird thing where it's like you can't actually make any money for the real work you do, but you can make stupid faces on TikTok all day long now and make money and do, like crazy, whatever it is. It's dumb. But I agree with you about that. I've always felt like athletes should share in the fruits of their labor.
Yeah. And it would have made a lot. I mean, I'm only coming from my little snapshot of the world, but it would have made a lot of it would have made our performance better because we would have had better inputs. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally a bunch of us just lived off $1 Whoppers for a whole summer. It's all we could afford. It's all we could afford, you know? I mean, imagine if the nutrition matched, like now big universities do that. I mean, this was 25 years ago, so it was different, but like
they gave us, horrendous.
I mean, just total crap. But what that did to our bodies from an injury perspective, like, did we ever take a supplement, like a vitamin? Not once. You know, but they had me on prednisone for 4 years straight, which completely wrecked my gut, you know? So, you know, they were all about giving all the chemicals and all the allopathic stuff. But when it actually came to the things that would have been truly beneficial, it just left a really bad taste in my mouth. But the beautiful thing is like, within a month of being exposed to organic food and yoga, I had no more pain. Where like I had 3 years of chronic back pain. Like I had Dr. Greenman, who was supposedly like the United States best back doctor, tell me that he was like, man, I don't even know how you can kick. Like that was his assessment of me. I'm like, how can you say that? Like I'm obviously doing what I'm doing out there. Like, and he would sit there with like 7 interns and they would all be like poking at me and examining me and never giving me anything of any real value.
Right.
But I go to a $5 yoga class and, you know, have a chiropractor adjust me like once every couple of weeks and I'm gold. Like, so that was just another way for me to like completely kind of let go of the allopathic model of things.
So I wanted to give you a moment. I want to hear about a little your sort of perception. I'm not a person who's ever been super into yoga. Like I've danced around the edges of some of that kind of thing. But I certainly have lots of friends who have at times in their life really been into it. And, you know, even like early on when I met Laura, she was sort of going through some of that sort of, you know, indoctrination and you know, the sort of initiation into certain aspects of that cult and the trip to India and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little bit, since you brought it up, about that sort of experience, the sort of transformation it took from like this thing that added to your life and helped you in like such a substantial way, and then observing like this very weird thing. I mean, at this point, unfortunately, it doesn't seem weird to us, but it just makes it just like all of the other things, but in its own unique way. I mean, somebody just has to watch like, did you see that documentary, Wild Wild Country, about the Osho?
Osho.
Right. There's so many of these like weird stories, but like at the core of all of this is this like weird movement to make Westerners feel inferior to like Eastern ideals and thought, but then apply the Western model of like capitalism and sucking the soul out of things to that thing and turn it into this weird process and whatnot. So from someone who experienced both ends of it, let's hear a little about that.
Well, I was very lucky because my exposure to yoga was always indirect. Mm-hmm. And it was never from a spiritual perspective. The yoga aspect of things, I took a elective. My girlfriend, when I was a senior, we were picking electives and she's like, let's take yoga. So I went into a class where I was the only guy and there was like 20 plus hot college kids in there. But I was a fish in water, man. I was like, I love this, you know, just on that level, it was wonderful. And this was like 1997 or 98. And I liked the class because I always loved stretching. You know, as an athlete, one of my favorite things to do is to like lie on the court and, you know, do my alligator rolls or lie in the football field and do all my triangle stretches like that. Like I always loved stretching. So yoga was just like, to me, it was like just a deeper calisthenic stretch. And then what yoga was good for me was teaching me how to breathe. Because I was a very, very, you know, I just chest breather essentially. And so I was pretty fortunate because only like my second or third instructor, he said something very profound. He said, yoga, the asana aspect of yoga is just there to trick you to breathe deeply for as long as you're doing your asana. And so the pranayama, which is the breath work, was what my body needed, because I asphyxiated when I was 4 years old. So I had what's called a lot of samskaras, which are like they're miasmic imprints in the body tissue, or in the field of the body. Nobody really knows if it's in the tissue or not. That's a hypothesis. But so I had all these miasmic, imprints all throughout my lungs. And so yoga, learning how to box breathe, and then learning the spiral breathing techniques, that was like, that opened my whole body up, because the majority of my body was just tight just because I held my breath on every breath. And so all the traumas that I had that I was holding on to, by age 27, I had cycled through the majority of my childhood traumas. I had gotten hit by cars a few times, been in a bunch of car accidents, bunch of fights, all these things that the body had accumulated just through like really deep breathing. I was able to like move through that. And I was also very fortunate because where I was practicing when I was in Florida was in an area called Boca Raton. And the field that I would practice with my guys at was right next to Bikram's wife yoga studio. So Bikram yoga, like the hot yoga.
There's another cult documentary on that one on Netflix for the
yeah, but the funny thing is a lot of people don't want to admit they like it when they're in the cult. Like there were so many different times I saw like, all these like we would laugh because we would sample different yoga classes all throughout Florida. And you would get like the super spiritual guy that would rip his shirt off, and all the women would be like, oh, downward dog now. And it's just like, oh my God. It was like total like Michael Bolton cheese fest, But the chicks loved it. Like like a lot of people just had to be honest about it. Like, in retrospect, they regret things, but at the time they were actually loving every minute of it, type thing. So I was like with a bunch of athletes, like we would go to Ashana's yoga class, and there would be like 10 pro athletes in the yoga class, and it was hot yoga. So nobody could look pretty. It wasn't like you were there to like, show off. We were all sweating our balls off, and like, we would just come from the football field. So it wasn't like, it was awesome. I think I was in that world. I haven't been in that world in a long time, but like I was in that world before it got too pretentious, before it got too spiritual. And then I always looked at my ashram life as separate from my yoga life. Like my yoga life was about physical upkeep and really breathing. And then my ashram life was more about my spiritual path. None the twain should meet. Like I never saw yoga as being spiritual, because it was just like advanced calisthenics. Mm-hmm. And I've always seen the physical and the spiritual world as being, overlapping, like they're one and the same. And all the people that I knew that had very profound yoga capabilities, they were actually had more profound spiritual capabilities. And so I always associated with them and more on the spiritual level of things than the quote unquote yoga world.
Interesting. Okay, so yoga and spirituality separate, but physical world and spiritual world overlapped. And so I'm just trying to sort of resolve how you mean that in my own head. So like for you, yoga, part of the athletic process, part of the physical vehicle sort of refinement. But those two things where it gets messy is when like the yoga and the spiritual practice come together. And that's generally where like the out of control cult stuff comes from.
No, I have to put it better.
Okay.
if you're super, like if you have the capacity to concentrate, which is spirituality, you have the capacity to be yogic.
Gotcha. Okay.
A greater capacity to be yogic. What I notice is in the yoga world, the majority of people were not spiritual at all.
Right.
The majority of them were just trying to, it was just another form of exercise. Like I would say the majority. I mean, at one point I was teaching 11 classes a week, and I would say maybe 5% of those people would come to meditation. Maybe. And I was always pushing meditation and reading spiritual texts and all that. The majority of people could give a shit about that. But those super, super like concentrators that I knew in my life, they could all do yoga like it was nothing, because the mind sponsors the body. It's not the body sponsoring the mind. So the people that I knew that had really, really great control of their mind, they could control their body at will.
So then what do you think is going on? No, I agree with you, right? And you see that with athletes as well. Like it is not everyone who like is physically talented goes super far, but when somebody hones in on like concentration and how to draw on stores of muscle memory, stores of energy at the right moment and things like that, when you're in a match or when you're in a performance or whatever, like that's like a similar kind of thing. What do you think is going on with like, so I think of all the people who get pulled into yoga, right? Like they have a friend who's going to a yoga studio and they kind of resist going for a while. And then one day they go, and then like, before you know it, they're like wearing all the things and saying all the things, and they're going for yoga teacher training somewhere in India or whatnot. Or they're now, now they're in this ongoing thing for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, 2 years. What is going on with that? Because I agree with you. I don't find most of those people to be spiritual at all. But they're spending a lot of time doing something that they think is spiritual, right? What is that wheel?
My projection onto that whole world is coming from a young man's perspective when I was in it. When I was in it, because I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs, the two places for me to meet women were in yoga and at Starbucks. Like, so like that was my dating world. That was my dating scene.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I wasn't a corporate person. I never wore a tie to work or anything like that. Like, so just to be completely honest, I think young heterosexual men that get into it, they're surrounded by a bunch of girls.
Right.
And those girls want leadership, and for as much as, I had wonderful female instructors, there was no way that I should have had so many people in my classes that I did, but it was because I was a young man that could speak somewhat eloquently, that had their best interests at heart, actually. And it was more, I was a good leader. And so I would have huge classes, and I had a lot of them. And so I think it was like, if you have any leadership capacity in today's world, how can you really be a leader where you're not under like somebody else's thumb? I can't say what it's like for women in that world, because I'm not a woman, but in the late 90s, like there was a market, and opened a few classes, and then before you know it, they were full.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those things. And I can't really speak for that world right now. Like to me, I'm a little bit ahead of the curve with most things that I give my attention to. So I don't even know if the yoga world is even big anymore.
I don't know if it's big or if they've just found a way to, I mean, I've never been part of it, but like I know lots of people who are. So I don't know if it's like big and getting bigger, or if they've just like done an excellent job of bilking the people who are part of it for an ongoing source of revenue and income and money and attendance to things that give it some level of gravitas that it otherwise wouldn't have, right? But I have my observation has been like, once you even just gently from a distance touch one of those cults, like they'll continue making you offers forever, right? They're continuing to have this and that, and like there's no like ends to the number of like courses and seminars and this and that, and the feeling like, oh, if you miss this one, then you've missed the whole. It's kind of like the conspiracy like world, right? Like if you don't go to this conference, you might not be there at the moment that so and so reveals this or that, and then they don't, and then but they trick you again with that the next time, and right? Like it feels kind of like that sort of, there's like a multi-level marketing aspect to it, and like a, reveal only so much and save more for laterness to it. That is, at a certain point, one comes to, in my case, like 5 or 6 years old, comes to recognize as like, oh, how they just trick you into this never ending participation in something and whatever. Right. So yeah. All right. So I think this is going to
with everything now.
With everything. Yeah. But the yoga one dazzles people with that Eastern flair.
Yeah. Really, my friends have run martial arts schools. They run the same scam.
Yeah, same shit. Yeah.
I have friends that run one of the world's biggest qigong schools. It's the same scam.
Why do you think Easterners are so taken with the Eastern stuff?
Well, because it's part of the big programming, the social engineers, the way that you destroy the Western world's values. When you take people, first you have to take them from monotheism, and you have to take them from monotheism to monism. So in the United States, the social engineers figured out in the 30s and 40s, okay, we have to absolutely deteriorate the family core. The best way to deteriorate the family core is to get people believing in monism and not monotheism. And everything from the East is based on monism.
Do you think so? One of the things that you one of the things that you hear a lot about people who grow up in the East, particularly in Asian countries, is that a lot of them are very interested in the West, right? So is it a reverse psychology going on there, right? Like or propaganda for the West, and they aren't really interested in Western culture?
Well, you always have to look at the big flows of money. And so this is a cool thing that I was taught at Michigan State, was that the big flows of money, like the central banking money, always flows to where there's young people. So they have actuaries. Insurance companies create the securities that create all the money for the banks. And so these actuaries actually tell them where people are going to be. And so where old people are, they divest their interest from where old people are, and they always push money to where there are young people. And in the 90s, they knew, like it was, well, I mean, they knew way before that, but I was told in the 90s, all the big money is heading to the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, because their average age is half of what the United States and Europe is.
Mm-hmm.
So all the social engineers do is they play the dialectic where the grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah.
That's all they have to do. All they have to do is to the Eastern people say, hey, the Western ideal is where it's at. And to the Western people, they go, hey, the Eastern ideal is where it's at. And because the small person doesn't see the big flows, they don't understand that they're just being engineered to think that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. So, all right. I think that there's going to have to be a number of conversations between us, because there's like so many things to talk about. And then all these little unexpected side pockets open up. But I think what we're going to do now is move over into the supporter segment. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about dance music scene or homesteading or your ventures between United States and South America or something. So if you would like to join us for that, you can go to patreon.com/offplanetmedia, emilymoyer.locals.com, or rockfin.com/Emily Moyer. But before we do, Christopher, tell people where they can find your offerings. Or do you have offerings right now?
Yeah, on Instagram, I put a bunch of little videos up of just a lot of my homesteading, domesteading construction work. And that's BioCharisma on Instagram. And my website's going to be launched within a week or so. I'm not allowed to say what the name is, but let's just say my name is in it. So that will be up pretty soon. And then I'm relaunching the BioCharisma podcast also. So that's where you heard Michael, Joseph, and I. But I'm rebooting that, but we're doing it more within the context of cosmology, because I'm a real trivium, quadrivium guy. And so once you get to the end of the quadrivium, you're into cosmology. And I think it's very important for people to have a generalist, big picture view of things and work their way back into detail, instead of starting with the detail of the facts of things and working their way forward, trying to figure it out. So we're going to have a lot of really good conversations. I got a lot of badass people that are going to be on that. So that's where people can find me at the moment.
Awesome. All right, guys, we're going to move on over. We will see you on the other side.